I guess we'll get started. My entourage is here. So we're Somasource. Somasource is, as was mentioned, is an alternative crowdsourcing platform. But we're actually we call ourselves a private crowd, and we'll talk a little bit about that more later. We've been around for about 4 years and have around 35 people in our organization. We're based right down here in San Francisco. So Somasource is a nonprofit. And so today I want to talk about, before we dive into our platform and its capabilities, I want to talk a little bit about two big problems and how we merge those two to try to solve both the big data problem and the problem of poverty, global poverty. And what we see here, the map at the top, that's the sort of corner here. This whole area is a slum outside of Nairobi, Kenya, called Kibera. And it's a place where a number of our workers come from. And so the big problem here, of course, is 1.1 billion live on less than $1.25 a day, adjusted for purchasing power. So that would be like if you were to be walking the streets of San Francisco, you had a shack under a bridge somewhere, so housing was kind of taken care of for you, but you had to live on $1.25. So the first thing we want to do is get into a little bit of where poverty is today. So this is a really awesome data visualization software called Gapminder. At the bottom here we have life expectancy, and over here we have income per capita. And what we just saw was the last 100 years of history, human history, around the globe. And generally speaking, what we see is an increase in per capita income. You have these big bubbles. This is, let's see, this is India, this is China, the US is up there in yellow. And so the US and Europe kind of lead the way. And then China and India, as you can see, are slowly becoming, getting out of first lower income status to middle income and even eventually to first world country. And down at the bottom here, though, we have sub-Saharan Africa, which is still kind of stuck. The life expectancy has gone up. There's been great investment in healthcare, that sort of thing, and medicine. But ultimately, from a wealth perspective, they're still kind of stuck at this lower tier. So this might give you a picture of the world that's somewhat positive, and it should. It is positive. But it does sort of hide some real big disparities within those countries. So I just want to touch upon that really quickly. So this is Nairobi, Kenya, and this is Nairobi. So this is like Kibera slum, and this is a couple miles away. You have your Range Rover and some nice, looks like a baby shop there. This is a member of our team. Alex took this picture when he was out there last. Similarly, in Mumbai, India, we have this really striking contrast between high-density slums and amazing development in the country. And similarly for places like Rio, Brazil, with the favelas. And so what we're talking about here then, as we move into like the next wave of fighting poverty, I think what we're really looking at is income inequality and its effects on unemployment. And the biggest measure of this is the Gini coefficient. Hopefully I said that right. And this basically measures income disparity on a per-country basis. The CIA is very interested in this data because it deals with national security, actually, and the stability of these countries. And basically, so they publish this data. And the way the scale works is essentially if you were 0, then you would have perfect, everyone would basically be making the same amount of money. And as you go higher to 1, that would be as if one person just owned all the wealth in your country. And what we've seen in the last 20 years is, and especially in the last 10 years, is that this disparity and this income inequality has been rising very rapidly. And this is causing some problems. So this is a quote from the chief economist of the Asian Development Bank, basically saying if another 240 million people could have been lifted out of poverty in the last 2 years if inequality had remained stable. And the hardest hit of all of these people are youth. So this is a problem in the United States. It's a problem in every other country in the world. It's a big global problem. And so in, like, for example, Uganda, they have 62% unemployment for youth. Kenya, 30%. India as high as 20% in urban areas. So it's a big problem. And when youth are unemployed, you have lots of things start to happen. And then in the worst case scenarios, you have child soldiers, children trying to just find any way to get work. They'll get hired by militias. Or when parents give up children for human trafficking. Those are the sort of worst case scenarios. So I guess the first part of this is just to say that we have some forces of inequality that are shared and global now. It's not just about first world countries and third world countries. These are things that we all share, and we all need to work to try to solve these problems. And there are a lot of forces kind of pushing income inequality and influencing that, from financial liberalization, so being able to, basically opening up regulations and deregulating markets both within countries and globally, governmental corruption, growing population, and the aging population, lack of unionization, there's been a huge dip in unionization, et cetera, et cetera. What we want to focus on today is skills bias, and this will take us into what SamaSource does and how we attempt to solve this problem and solve our customers' problems with big data. So one of the things that has been noticed in the last 20 years is that there's essentially a bias towards higher level technology and skills for higher level technology. So basically what this means is the jobs in technology and those sectors influenced by technology rewards skilled labor more than unskilled labor. And so what we get in this middle area here is this kind of chasm. So you have like low skilled labor, very low paid work, and much higher skilled labor increasing very rapidly. And this sort of dip where people can get caught in between that if they don't have the right systems to back that up. And the IMF is looking into this in developing countries too. As I mentioned before, this is US data, but it's not just a US problem. So how can we attack this? We seek at SamaSource to provide an entry point into higher skilled jobs, into technology work. And many of the populations that we work with, this is a picture of one of our centers in Kenya. Many of the populations we work with don't have access to a computer. They have very little sort of basic computer skills, being able to log into the internet, create Gmail accounts, et cetera. And also have little soft skills training as well, like why should I show up to work for 8 hours a day? Like what does a shift mean? Why is it important to be on work on time? That sort of thing. And so what this does is it means that there's no way for them to get from low skill to high skilled labor. And luckily, in a lot of these countries, there's a growing ICT market in the form of BPOs, business process outsourcing centers. And the problem with that is when they look at this form of labor, they see this higher cost. So if I'm working at a BPO and I'm managing a team, hiring an impact worker is going to be increase the cost much more than a traditional worker. And we want to bring down those costs. So this brings in the SamaSource solution, which is our technology platform and some secret sauce, which we'll talk about as well. So the Sama Hub essentially seeks to do a few things to get this curve, drop the area of this curve lower so that we can hire these impact workers, help them, and make them really great workers to process your data. So the first thing is, of course, breaking down digital work into a sort of virtual assembly line of small trainable micro work. So a lot of people come to us in a lot of organizations and they're like, hey, we have this, so like, we just heard about receipt data. I imagine that even something as simple as a receipt could probably be broken down into tinier parts. And so one of the things that our platform is really good at is breaking that work into as small parts as possible into individual sort of units of skill. The second thing we do is provide automated QA tools for identifying agents that fall below performance levels and quality thresholds. So this is really important, obviously, for getting a workforce that knows exactly how to manage your data and clean it up in whatever way. And then finally, we leverage training tools to help those agents that do fall off to recalibrate with the team and get back onto the production line. And then we also have a sort of secret sauce, which is a solutions design team, which takes care of a lot of the sort of developing of workflows, building, as John was speaking of, building the right workspace so that the workers know exactly what to do and it's very clear to them, all of that sort of stuff. And we just rolled out a new platform, and this is the general architecture of it. And so this is what supports all of that. It's essentially a project management piece, a workflow engine. So this allows us to create different workflows for the tasks as they move through. So someone might be identifying an item in an image, someone else may be adding a caption to that item, et cetera. And that's all handled through our workflow engine. And then finally, we have a task allocation subsystem. This is essentially our version of Mechanical Turk. And I can talk later if anyone has any questions about why we didn't use Turk. It's not because they aren't great. I would have loved to plug into Turk. We just had a few technical challenges with regard to our specific workforce and using them back in the day when we started this platform. Let's talk a little bit about crowdsourcing in general. Luckily, John covered a lot of this stuff already. So we have a private versus a public crowd. So with a public crowd, one of the nice things you can do, especially with something like Turk, is set up plurality, which was spoken of before, basically getting agreement between a number of agents to get the answer you need. And so that really helps with quality a lot. Or setting up review flows on your own and building your own workflow engines to manage those. And then the other sort of strategy is just identifying high performers in general. And John spoke a lot about this already, but setting up all sorts of qualifications to essentially find your sort of rockstar workers within this giant crowd. So our crowdsourcing platform uses elements of this. From a plurality standpoint, that's proven really not cost effective for us, and it really doesn't pay a living wage to our workers, and that's one of our criteria for doing this work, is that it pays a living wage. We do, however, use some review and tiered review approaches to some of our work when necessary. And then as far as identifying high performers, for us it's a little bit different because we work with teams. We have teams all over the world. And so when we look at our team, it looks something like this. This is a general accuracy chart from one of our projects and one of our teams. And you can see, like, I should have added units, oops. So in the first 2 to 3 weeks, while the workforce is being trained, there's a lot of bounciness. But then very quickly, the team calibrates. And once it's calibrated, our system can much more easily just pick off outliers within that team using more automated tools like test questions that we sort of pepper throughout the work. And so that's kind of an advantage for us, because now we have this great team that really understands what you're trying to do with the data. They're around for a long time, and as new workers come on, they know how to calibrate them to your requirements and adjust as they move along. So, so far this has been a great solution for us, and we've used it in a lot of different applications. So from content moderation, data cleanup, machine learning, digital transcription, and content creation. And there's a lot of overlap between all of these different categories. The first thing I want to talk about is, well, what we want to focus on today, I guess, is machine learning, because I think it's being used more and more, and it touches on a lot of these applications. So this is a sort of silly example, but one of the things we do is product catalog curation. So you can imagine you have millions of products in your catalog, or maybe even hundreds of thousands. You're getting new products in all the time, and maybe you want to train a machine how to recognize and categorize those products. So in this example, we have vacuums. You can imagine these are all different sorts of products, and our workers can go through a list of these and identify, oh, this is an upright, this is a canister vacuum, this is a handheld. pretty hot stuff, I know. But generally speaking, they can use that data as seed data for a training algorithm. And, I'm sorry, for training set. And then from an image tagging perspective, we do a lot of this as well, where we can take images and train our workers to identify certain objects. Then they can create a seed set of data for training a machine learning algorithm to identify those objects. And then finally, we have sentiment analysis as well, which could be like bias in the news or enthusiasm for a product, or perhaps understanding how someone feels when a product review. So we've done this with a lot of customers, who we've worked with so far. And again, there's tons of different applications for this, and our platform is pretty broad, so it handles a lot of different kinds of applications. And from an impact standpoint, we've done pretty well as well. So from impact, you typically are looking at breadth times depth. So the number of people times the amount you've really impacted their lives. And so we've helped around 3,700 workers. These are counts as of last quarter. And they, because they have typically an average of 3.6 dependents, that means 11,495 dependents, around 15,000 people directly impacted. And this is a huge impact for the communities that these agents work in. It really boosts the economy, and there's a lot of downstream effects from this. And then getting back to the sort of skills bias problem, a lot of what this work does is allows our agents to move on to kind of bigger and better things. Either move up the chain in the ICT world, so a large number of those who stay at work continue to do ICT work, but maybe do higher level ICT work. So this is like the gateway into that whole technology space. And then a lot of our agents also go back to school and leverage this knowledge to sort of go back to school and then get a better job later, because it helps fund their ongoing education, which again allows them to move into that higher level skill area. So I guess this is a little quick, but in conclusion, so we have a lot of really big problems, and we need kind of as many people helping to solve them as possible. And so I hope that even if you don't work with us, you do start thinking, maybe someone in your organization start advocating for doing something to help solve these problems. A really good example of this is a company called 360 Incentives. They were really interested in moving into Haiti, and we had a very small center there that was very difficult to get up and running and moving successfully just because of the lack of infrastructure there. And they really made a serious commitment there by providing training staff, flying down back and forth, and they've kind of brought them in as part of their company through a partnership with us and gotten very hands-on. So we can be a black box for organizations, or you can really get directly into the impact side of things with us. And so that was a really good story. So now we have 22 agents in Haiti that are cranking away on some tasks for them. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
I was in Kenya a long time ago. I see things haven't really changed for the better, unfortunately. The question I have is, and this might be an antiquated model, but wouldn't the infrastructure of the Peace Corps be helpful for you, or is that obsolete?
Yeah, so the question was, would the infrastructure of the Peace Corps be able to help us out? And we do work with a lot of partners on the ground, especially with soft skills training. So that's something that we try not to pick up the full cost for. So there are a lot of organizations down there that are helping with that sort of stuff and allow us to source candidates that at least have some basic understanding of what it means to come to work and how turn on a computer and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and another question. So how do you market to the people in Kenya? How do you acquire those workers at a low cost?
Yeah, so demand for I'm sorry? Oh, sorry. The question is, how do we market to those people in Kenya or in the countries that we service? And really, again, we do try to work with all of the partners we can in the area that already have some sort of training program set up. This is really the best way to reach out to people. The demand, as you can imagine, is massive. So the supply, I should say, is massive from a labor force standpoint. So it's not really hard to find people. It's just it's kind of hard to say no, I guess. So there's definitely lots of streams of folks coming in through training programs that we then recruit into our centers.
Do you have an estimate on the cost it takes to acquire, say, one worker?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. The question was, do I have an estimate on the cost to train one worker?
This question is for Martin. For SummerSource, I noticed that in Kenya you have a huge supply. Well, relative to the other countries, what would you say are the key barriers to getting more workers in the other countries? Is it just publicity or? No,
it's really just building capacity. One of the nice things is in India and Kenya, you have a situation where you have a lot of unemployment, some really big problems there, and you also have the emergence of a strong BPO sector. So you have leadership that can grow, sort of manage these teams. And so that's really the key thing. And so when we're moving into these other areas, we really do require some degree of infrastructure to help support that. Just because it just takes so many resources to set that up, and we really want to scale our operations as much as possible to reach as many people. So we really do look for partnerships there and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Hi, Martin. You briefly touched on Mechanical Turk. Do you consider them a competitor? And if so, how do you compete with them on cost?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess I'd say two things to that. In some respects, we are a competitor with them. We are cost competitive in some regions of the world. I think a lot of it really comes down to the customer and what their needs are. Typically, we come in when going sort of head-to-head with Turk at a higher quality level. And most of that is just because we have a lot more control of our workforce. But we've also been in situations where we've actually been paired with Mechanical Turk as well. So Turk will do some things, and then maybe a higher level QA pass goes through our workers. So there are a lot of different scenarios that we've run into. But we really sit between crowdsourcing systems and the business process outsourcing world. So we're trying to keep at a fairly high skill level, so more complex tasks, as complex as we can handle, and still hire these workers. So yeah, hopefully that was somewhat answer your question.